Hello and welcome to IB Biology Notes with Dr. Kimo. This is A4.2 Conservation of Biodiversity. This topic is about the concept of biodiversity, species extinction, ecosystem loss, and the biodiversity crisis. There are multiple levels of biological diversity or biodiversity. First, ecosystem diversity. Each ecosystem has its own combination of species that interact with each other. So ecosystem diversity can be defined as variety in the combinations of species that interact within a community. High ecosystem diversity means that we have many different types of ecosystems, and that is necessary to sustain life in all parts of the planet, because many species can only survive in a certain ecosystem. And if we lose that ecosystem, we also lose a lot of species. Then there's species diversity. And this is what people usually mean when they talk about biodiversity in general. Species diversity is variety in the number of and abundance of species. High species diversity means that we have many different species in an ecosystem. And that makes an ecosystem more resilient so that it can tolerate disturbances better than an ecosystem with low species diversity, which means few species. Finally, there's genetic diversity. Variety in the allele numbers and frequencies in the gene pool of a species. Now, an allele is a version of a gene. Let's say that there exists 10 alleles of a specific gene. Then the allele number for that gene is 10. Let's say then that half of all the individuals of a species have the same allele. Then the frequency of that allele is 0.5. If the individuals all have the same allele, then the frequency of that allele is 1. And there's no variation between individuals regarding that gene. The gene pool, that's all the genetic information in all the individuals of a species. A species with high genetic diversity has many different alleles in its gene pool. Those alleles would preferably also have a relatively high frequency, so they would all be rather common. However, all the frequencies taken together always add up to 1. So in a species with high genetic diversity, there is simply a lot of variation between individuals. And high genetic diversity makes a species more resilient. Levels of biodiversity change over time. You know that roughly 2.2 million species have been named, and that it's impossible to know the actual number with certainty. It's even more difficult to make estimates about the past, but relative numbers can be calculated from the fossil record. The graph on the right has a time scale on the x-axis. The numbers mean millions of years from present. So the 0 at the far right is today, and the scale starts from about 550 million years ago, when the Cambrian period started, and that's what CM stands for, Cambrian. All the other letters at the x-axis also signify different geological time periods. The y-axis shows the number of genera based on the fossil record, and genera is the plural for genus. You can see that the curve is moving up and down, and that there have been 5 rapid drops in the number of genera, and these are mass extinctions. There have been 5 mass extinctions during the last 400 something years, and that's when many species have disappeared and others have taken their place. A mass extinction is when more than 75% of species go extinct during a geologically short period of time, and this definition may vary. The 5th mass extinction, shown here in red, is when the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct. Non-avian means not bird-like, So all the dinosaurs except for those that gave rise to birds. The sixth mass extinction, the Holocene extinction, is said to be underway because of human activities. And Holocene is the name of a geological epoch that we are living in right now. Human activities are driving species to extinction. So what is it really that we do? Well, one thing is habitat destruction. We destroy the habitats for many species by, for example, building cities. We also overharvest. This picture shows a forest which has been harvested partially. We do the same thing with many other natural resources as we see them, like fish, for example. We spread invasive species on purpose or by mistake, like this foxglove. We pollute in different ways, and we are causing global climate change. Human activities threaten entire ecosystems, and they continue to be lost due to several things that we do. Here's a list. We need a lot of land for agriculture, and wherever we grow crops, there used to be another type of ecosystem. We build cities, and it also requires land and causes pollution. We overexploit natural resources, as mentioned before. Mining and smelting also requires land and may release toxic heavy metals or chemicals into the environment. Dams can have huge effect on freshwater ecosystems, and irrigation can disrupt natural water flow. We use up and pollute a lot of water. We allow fertilizer to leach from our fields into freshwater ecosystems, which can cause eutrophication. And then there's climate change, which may make the climate too dry or hot or variable or something else for some current ecosystems to survive. Let's look at the causes for the current biodiversity crisis. There have been 5 mass extinction events and probably many smaller local events. But even when there's no extinction event going on, there are many species that go extinct all the time. The background extinction rate is approximately 1 in a million per year. So on average, 1 species in a million goes extinct every year. The current rates are 100 to 1,000 times that background value. And if this trend continues, we might have values that are 10,000 times the background value within 100 years. The main causes are not really new, but their intensity has increased lately. The main reason being the increase in the number of people. The graph on the right shows 2 things. The annual growth rate of the world population, that's the purple line, and the world population, that's the black line with the green background. You can see from the graph that during the last 100 years or so, the development has been exponential. So we go from 2 billion people about 100 years ago to 8 billion people today. That's 4 times the number 100 years ago. Until then, the population had increased already quite a lot during the last 100 years, from about 1 billion to 2 billion. But earlier in history, the growth rate was 0.04%, and that's very much lower than today. The world population is, however, estimated to start decreasing within this century. It's estimated to peak between 10 and 11 billion people during the current century, and then it's going to go down. And this is based on the fact that the annual growth rate of the world population has already been decreasing for quite some time. So have a look at the purple line, which shows that about 60 years ago, the annual growth rate of the world population was 2.3%. So each year, the world population increased by 2.3%. Since then, it's been going down and is today about 0.9% per year. This rate is expected to decrease further and to become negative towards the end of the century, and a negative growth rate means that the population is actually shrinking. How do we know if we have a biodiversity crisis? There are some ways to assess changes in biodiversity. You can study the population size of a species over time, or you can study the range of a species over time, the range being the area where you can find a certain species. You can study genetic diversity within a species. You can study the number of species in an ecosystem, and you can study the richness and evenness of biodiversity in an ecosystem. More about this in the next slide. You can assess the numbers of threatened species within a taxonomic group, and you can assess the area covered by an ecosystem. Simpson's reciprocal index is a way to quantify biodiversity. It takes into account the richness and the evenness. A high value of the index means high biodiversity, and you get a high value if you have many species and equal numbers of individuals of different species. Many species means high richness, and equal numbers means high evenness. This is a formula that you should be able to use, although you're not required to know it by heart. Uppercase D is the index, the result of the calculation. Uppercase N is the total number of individuals of all species. And lowercase n is the number of individuals of a single species. Here we have two examples, two locations. Each of them harbor 6 species, and lowercase n in the right-hand columns indicate the number of individuals of each species. When we add all these numbers together, we get uppercase N, the total number of individuals of all species in each location. That's 58 versus 61, so more or less the same. From this, we can calculate uppercase N times uppercase N minus 1 above the line in the formula. And these are the numbers we get: 3,306, 3,660. Then we need to calculate lowercase n times lowercase n minus 1. And those numbers is what you can see in the new tables for location 1 and location 2. For example, for location 1, the number of individuals of species A is 25, and according to the formula, we should calculate lowercase n times lowercase n minus 1. That's 25 times 24, which equals 600. And so we do this for all the species and sum up the numbers that we get. For location 1, we get 974, and for location 2, we get 646. When we put these numbers into the formula, we get an index of 3.4 for location 1 and 5.7 for location 2. The biodiversity is higher in location 2 than location 1. And since the number of species in these two locations is the same, the difference is due to the evenness of in location 2. If you compare the number of individuals of the different species, you can see that the numbers are much more even in location 2 than in location 1. There are several ways to protect species. In situ conservation is preferred but not always possible. It takes place in the natural environment to which a species is adapted and where it forms part of an ecosystem. It often involves active management like selective hunting, feeding, and limiting human access. Ex situ conservation takes place outside of the natural habitat of a species. Benefits include ideal conditions, pedigree, which means that you can prevent inbreeding, medical care, and the possibility to reintroduce a species into the wild. Germplasm refers to genetic resources like seeds, gametes, or tissues. There are many germplasm collections, especially seed banks, a global network of approximately 1,700 seed banks. Many are rather small, but some have large and diverse collections from around the world. Two examples: the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. It's in a remote location, halfway between Norway and the North Pole, and it's inside a frozen Arctic mountain. Another example is the Millennium Seed Bank in Sussex, United Kingdom. It's the world's largest. It has 2.4 billion seeds from 40,000 different species. This map shows the location of Svalbard, the blue dot, and the number of seed sample contributions to the Svalbard Vault from different countries of the world. There are many initiatives for the targeted protection of selected species, and EDGE is one of them. The Edge of Existence program focuses on protecting endangered species that have few close relatives. You see 3 examples of such species here. The loss of such species would lead to a disproportional loss of biodiversity. So that's why it makes sense to target protection efforts towards these species. That's all for now. See you next time.